Brothers and sisters, about 1 month ago today, on the first Sunday of August, we celebrated the Feast of the Transfiguration. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospel, the high point of Jesus' public life, he takes 3 of his closest, Peter, James, and John, up a high mountain. And there before them, the Gospel says, he changes colors. He becomes bright, dazzling, snow his garments. See, he's transfigured. Although what happens, if we really watch the scene, Jesus just shows his true colors, right? Who gets transfigured? The apostles. They get a glimpse of what is to happen prior to Jesus taking them down the mountain, where indeed he will begin the trek to Jerusalem. The trek that leads to his passion and death. His glory is only revealed in the resurrection after his intense sufferings. Last Sunday, we read, as we continuously read Matthew's Gospel every week this year, we read about Jesus asking the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They all give, as I mentioned last week in the homily, the Oprah Winfrey response at first, right? Well, you might be this, you might be that. Who knows? You could be Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And then Jesus says, no, but who do you say that I am? And that's when Peter opens his mouth. And for once, and wonderfully, he doesn't stick his foot in his mouth, right? He says, "You are the Christ." And he goes even further, the Son of the living God. For this, Jesus makes Peter the chief rabbi of his church. "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Peter is really upheld in responsibility and honor. And no sooner has that happened than we hear this morning's gospel. Jesus reminds them again. He's on his way to Jerusalem, where there the Son of Man will be handed over and killed. And Peter takes him aside. Now here's this. We only see it in hindsight and say, what is going on here? But Peter represented probably what many of the disciples would have thought, that Jesus was going to Jerusalem to claim his kingship. And of course, Jesus would agree, but not in the way they thought. And so he says, "Forbid it, Lord, that anything like this would happen to you." Do you notice? Now, in Mark's gospel, it says Jesus looked at the other disciples. Matthew doesn't say that. He just says directly to Peter, "Get behind me. Get in line. Get in line in discipleship. You are thinking like Satan. You're not thinking like God. You're thinking human terms. Get behind me." So it's a real correction. So again, Peter has opened his mouth and stuck his foot in it, right? And yet, constantly, throughout this journey, Jesus constantly reminds the disciples of what's at stake in following him, and they have to learn. They have to learn the hard way. Perhaps some of them felt as Jeremiah did after years of ministering to the Lord in the city of Jerusalem. "You duped me. You told me one thing, and look what's happened. I get nothing but derision, and yet your word is like a fire." Jesus has said in his public life, "I want my words to be like fire on the earth." Jesus is never disappointed in the Father. From the beginning, from the get-go, Jesus knows what his Father wants of him. The Father is asking total obedience, and that's what Jesus gives. And he says, "Anyone who follows me, you get in line." It takes some time for the 12. When do they finally get it? At the resurrection, right? That's when they get it. That's when things become clearer. We who have been baptized into Christ and received a participation in his passion, death, and resurrection at baptism, approach his holy table every week in the Eucharist. So we should have in mind what's going on. And yet, even for us, we need that reminder. Isn't it interesting that St. Paul says in one of the most wonderful lines he has in the very wonderful letter to the Romans, one of his major letters. As he gets to the section of his letter where he's going to give them some practical advice, Paul says something that truly is extraordinary. He says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. The very conversion of your mind. Paul uses, and for us who are a liturgical church, it's very important. Paul uses liturgical language to describe ordinary life. Logike latreia in Greek, your worship in the Logos. Offer your spiritual worship daily. Yes, we come together and gather to offer that spiritual worship in intensity before the Father every time we celebrate Mass. But Jesus is, or Paul is saying, you should be doing this how you live your life. That when you get up in the morning or when you're in midday, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. That will show that what you do on Sunday at the liturgy makes perfect sense. Otherwise, there's a huge cut, which has always been true for us, a cut between Sunday and the rest of the week. It happens. We are prone. As Jesus was to tell Peter, you have to get in line. And we need God's constant help through his Son and in the power of the Holy Spirit to do that. So this Sunday is a great reminder that people who are rising high, like Peter, need to occasionally to be taken into humility so they know their place. Jesus has said, know your place. Even for someone who's ordained to any kind of ministry in our church, priest or deacon or bishop, the first thing you do before you get hands laid on you for ordination is what do? You prostrate on the floor. Why is that? So you know your ground. Anyone in the church has to know their ground. So today, in very challenging words, Jesus gives us the ground. If you coming and follow me, no matter whatever else is lost, you will gain your soul. But you can gain everything and really mess up your soul. And what I want for all of you, my followers, that you come with me. I've given you the very way to go. It isn't that I told you to do something to do that I wouldn't. I lead the way, and you follow. Challenging but beautiful words on this Sunday from the very gospel that is so, in fact, Jewish to the core, in reminding us that Jesus fulfills everything that was said of him beforehand, and yet at the same time, a gospel that is astonishing and new, because St. Matthew is always offering us something new about what Jesus did to make us new and beautiful brothers and sisters in his kingdom. May I conclude today with my offer that you have a good Labor Day, and my prayer and praise for all workers throughout this land as we celebrate that day for workers tomorrow. I also ask you to please keep in mind the ongoing pilgrimage and journey of Pope Francis to Mongolia, one of the most difficult pastoral journeys he will have made. As you know, it's up there right between China and Russia. It has an extremely tiny Catholic community, which Pope Francis paid attention to the other day in his homily at the Mass. He said, you're very tiny, but there's no problem with being small. That's the way the kingdom always begins, small. So may we, who are fortunate that the kingdom is not so small in the United States, so we have freedom of religion, many people are able to practice their faith beautifully, that we never forget what Jesus invites us to. A blessed Sunday and a blessed Labor Day.